What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. One that has been heavily requested in the comments, and I did plan on going over it, though with not much enthusiasm because I went over the last one and it wasn't a lot of fun, but I'll get into that more. So today, I'm going over the latest offering from Deafheaven, Lonely People with Power. This also comes out on the 28th of March on Roadrunner Records. This band formed in 2010 in San Francisco, California. This is their 6th album overall. Again, I reviewed their last album, Infinite Granite, which was a slab of doll. Honestly, I'm still just not a fan of that album. And to be honest, my relationship with this band is tenuous at best. I have definitely made jokes about this band in the past in the channel. I'll probably still make some, at least in regards to certain albums. But I got in this band with Sunbather. It was like one of the most hyped up albums I had heard about that year. I checked it out and I was like, well, I mean, it's okay. I just didn't get why people were hyping up this band so much. You know, it had kind of a unique sound at the time, but I did check out their follow-up, New Bermuda, and honestly, I thought that one was pretty good. In terms of like stuff that I've listened to by this band, that's probably the lone one that I really return to very much, and to be honest, it's really not that much. The whole post-black metal / black gaze thing is, I don't know, still something that, you know, I'm not like the biggest fan of, but when it's done well, I definitely acknowledge it. And despite all the comments that have been showing up, I was not really like super eager in terms of like going over this one. And well, I may have had a change of heart. Maybe not entirely with this band because, again, I did see them live once. I thought it was one of the most boring shows I think I've ever seen. And despite how I feel about this album, I probably wouldn't go see them again. But how I feel about this album, well, it kind of caught me off guard because, you know what? I'll just go ahead and say it. I think this is possibly the best album that this band has put out. I think somewhere between the last couple of albums, this band really kind of like learned how to just like latch on to dynamics. While I wasn't a big fan of Infinite Granite at all, there were some dynamics explored on that one that really didn't show up on other albums. In fact, I would call that pretty much a post-rock album with a light little freckling of black metal that popped up on it. It was mostly clean vocals. You know, there were a couple of growls. A lot of the songs did not have like, you know, any of that black metal sort of energy that this band definitely does have. But in terms of their song building, it was a little bit different. And that was one of my complaints about some of their earlier stuff is, while I liked the riffs and the lush atmosphere and, you know, all the things that this band does, they droned on stuff for so long. Even on New Bermuda, which, you know, I still think of pretty favorably, there are a lot of sections that just feel needlessly drawn out for the sake of just atmosphere and, I don't know, like an artistic statement or whatever. Some of it needed to be trimmed down. And going into this one, that was kind of what I was dreading. But once I got down to like the first 2 real tracks, because there are some interludes on here and I'll get into them, Doberman. This song is absolutely awesome. And it's a longer song, as are most of these songs on here. But the thing they do on this album that I feel like should have been done on earlier albums is transitions and dynamics coming a little bit sooner and really just kind of exploring songwriting a lot more. Like the dynamics on this album are unreal. Rather than just drawing out single parts of the songs or using like kind of that same post-metal kind of, you know, ascending, climbing sort of vibe and then falling off the fucking cliff as it goes to a quiet part and then climbing back up, there's way more in the way of like shifts in these songs. This opening track comes in groovy, like, you know, not just blast beats and static tremolos. It does have this nice strummed melody, but instantly there's like a good build-up and a solid melodic hook. It was like listening to like a blackened version of Quicksand. It slowly builds its way into like double time drums and then eventually it gets down to blast, but you get like some really nice like thrashy chugs. There's almost kind of a breakdown on the song. This definitely sounds 100% like the band, but there's definitely more urgency to it. There's a little bit more nuance. George has returned to screaming, which honestly I prefer him doing that. I think his clean vocals are all right, but they kind of come off as a little bit flat at times. But musically, this band is definitely making a statement here because I feel like this is like probably one of their most ambitious albums in terms of songwriting. You have songs that really just absolutely stand apart from one another here. There are definitely repeated elements. Of course, you have the giant, shimmering, ascending tremolo harmonies. The guitar work is lush and beautiful, whether it's just driving home these like just walls of, just tremolo harmonies, or kind of shrinking everything down into like fluttering, more atmospheric guitars, like stuff that is more akin to like post-rock itself, like, This Will Destroy You or Caspian or, any band remotely similar. But it's how they do that within the songs this time that really makes it interesting. These songs feel more adventurous. They move differently. Again, it's not like a steady ascension on every single track. In fact, there's some stuff on here that might be some of their most aggressive material to date. Magnolia and Relevator, honestly, you could have told me I was listening to like a slightly more poppy version of Immortal at certain points. They are riffy, they are chuggy. Revelator in particular just comes in aggressive as hell. Not only do you get these more heavy strummed melodies, you get these big chunky machine gun riffs that come in. There's a section on there where they kind of break up the blast beats with these chuggy accents, and I really like that because, one of my big complaints about this band was occasionally I think they would just get too static and just lay on, again, one part too long. Breaking it up with something just as simple as that kept that whole moment interesting, and then transitioning to these stampeding, heavy, just mean as shit drums. It really captures a different side of the band, and it still doesn't feel like alien to their sound. Like, it doesn't feel like they wrote like a token heavy song just to be heavier. There's still, again, all these shimmering melodies. It's just intensely melodic. The song is so intense that I was completely caught off guard by the Stop Like It Saw a Cop transition on there, where it drops out everything to like an isolated guitar. It's a little bit more distant and dark, like holy shit, you just kind of cut off everything there. But much like me on the highway, once the cop is out of view, you just take off again. Magnolia's a little bit more steady through the song, definitely a little bit more in the way of melodies on it, but it feels driven the entire time. And again, these groovy pockets that come in, really nice that they, again, break up like the static elements of this band's sound. And I gotta give it to the drum work on here. The drum work is fantastic. It drives the songs. It makes like all the riffy moments extra biting, which, yeah, this album has a lot of riffs, like more riffs than I honestly expected from this band. But again, I would say that this is their most ambitious album because I feel like they kind of revisit some of the material that they did on Infinite Granite, but approached it, I would say, like with a bit more of their old sound. Songs like Body Behavior, The Garden Route, and Heathen, they all kind of like take elements of post-rock, but they also do more than, just their standard blast and tremolo. Like there's really solid builds, lots of great clean playing. Like the clean melodies in here are very lush. I love all the different effects that they throw on the guitars. Like there's a lot of cool like delay on some of these guitar parts that kind of give it this extra reverby sound. Body Behavior in particular, I think that song's just catchier than hell. There's a lot of like, kind of like dark goth rock energy to it, like, listening to a more blackened version of like Unto Others, or even a little bit of Killing Joke sort of peppered in there. You have this kind of like post-punk sort of like stomp to the rhythm. There's really solid vocal dynamics on there. Like, George is doing like a lot of his like big shrill screaming, but this one they're a little bit more, theatrical. Like there's a little bit more like character to his vocals other than like that static shrill scream. And this album makes good use of open space. Like when they kind of do drop out from the, heavy shimmering, just in your face guitars, the melodies and the atmosphere that kind of like occupy all that space. And depending on the song, like it can give you like that giant grand sense of wonder, like, oh my God, this was such a lush and beautiful moment that I'm drawn in. Or it could be dark and haunting and, a little bit more somber. And these moments are generally where you hear the cleaner vocals come in, which, the cleaner vocals aren't my favorite thing, but I think they're used way more effectively here. Heathen in particular, I think has some pretty solid cleans. They're very breathy. They're very emotive. The opening of the song is a little odd because you get this isolated vocal that sounds like Michael McDonald singing in the shower. It's odd, but it kind of works. It does set up the song really well, and this band is still really good about setups and builds. But here I think it's done probably better than before, even in terms of like the longer songs in here. Like Amethyst and Winona, both tracks are, over 7 minutes. In fact, Amethyst is 8 minutes. But at no point did that song drag because their builds are a little bit more, I don't know, I wouldn't say like urgent, but they're paced better to the point where like the next layer comes in that builds up the song, or the next melody draws you in more. It avoids being repetitious by kind of like changing around the soundscape while maintaining that solid backbone of like blast beats and the heavy strums. Amethyst might be my favorite track on here. The build up in that song, I think, is amazing. You get this like ambient drone at first. The guitars are more clean. You get this, again, like more post-punk sort of vibe. I'm pretty sure there's synths on this song too, which it's kind of hard to tell with all the guitar effects going on, but this was one of the first songs in here where I really felt that was like a synth in the background, kind of like supplying a good background melodic hum. But the song builds so well. Like you get into these increasingly more lush melodies, and it eventually gets down to this gigantic crescendo with huge sweeping fucking melodies. Winona essentially does the same thing, except the first like 2.5 minutes of it is one steady build. And this is definitely a thing the band has done in the past and done pretty well, but again, the pacing of it. Like each layer comes at a certain point where you're starting to get into it more. You get this rumbling snare, a hi-hat, and again, it's like this droning ambience. And right where it starts to shrink down a little bit, it explodes into just a wall of sound and these crazy fucking drum fills. The song was like going from a room with like just soft lighting to being blasted in the face with strobe lights. And I think a lot of this album showed a lot of musical growth, a willingness to experiment, and I think it paid off here. I mean, within the span of one album, this band went from an album that sounded like nothing happening to an album that sounds like everything happening. And for the most part, it works. For the most part, because there's still some stuff that, kind of put me off, and naturally I have to pick things apart and find things I don't like, and it was pretty easy to find a thing that I didn't like about this. This album is over an hour long, and there's some fat that can definitely be trimmed off of it. And the fat is definitely the interlude tracks or the transitional tracks. All of them titled Incidental, which incidentally, I don't think any of them are really that necessary. The first one is more or less just sort of a lush setup, which honestly could have been included in the beginning of Doberman, and it probably would have worked. But to the band's credit, the other two incidental tracks are a little bit more thought out. Incidental 2 actually features a vocal performance from Jay Matthews, who I'm not familiar with. I looked her up, and apparently she's more known for film, I believe. You're greeted to a lot of like ambience and like kind of like an electronic sort of like buzzing in the background and some like droning synths. And she comes in and croons really well. There's a kind of like desperation to her like delivery, like she's trying not to sing too loud because the killer's in the house someplace and she doesn't want him to hear her singing. She probably shouldn't be singing at all. Best comparison I got, and I went with horror because at a certain point it just explodes into like a fucking like full of hell noise track. Like all of a sudden it's just walls of just fuzzy dissonance, and it's just crackling, and it kind of comes out of nowhere like a fucking jump scare. And it sits right between Amethyst and Revelator, which are two of my favorite tracks in here, and I don't think it necessarily transitions one into the other very well. And then Incidental 3 actually features Paul Banks from Interpol on it doing a spoken word, and it's there, it's okay. It does transition really well into Winona. Like the whole outro of that song is the intro of Winona. I thought that actually kind of worked, but at the same time, I thought it didn't need to be there. The legit songs on here stand on their own merit. They're really good. Pretty much every single song on here I really enjoyed. The closer, The Marvelous Orange Tree, which sounds like a children's book title, that has some of the most beautiful melodies on the entire album. And it kind of cools down the album really nicely because this album is just a roller coaster ride of just emotional trauma and highs and lows, and it's a really wild ride. Having a song that kind of like takes that lush beauty of like Cave-In's Jupiter and adds like a little bit of black metal to it, that really worked. And yeah, this album in general really worked. I really liked this album. I was not really prepared for that. I was prepared to pretty much go, well, yeah, this is a pretentious fucking mess of tremolos and blasts, and I'm bored to tears once again, but that didn't happen. This is an absolutely fantastic album for the most part here, and I'm going to go ahead and give it 4 stars. Even on New Bermuda, I found stuff that, just did not appeal to me, but overall, I thought it was a pretty decent album. This is just flat out good. The interludes on here, yeah, you can strip them out. I'm just not an interlude person, and I don't feel as though they complimented the album as much as probably the band thought they did. But when it comes down to the music, the songwriting here, this is their best work. This is their most dynamic work. These songs are catchy. They are huge. The production here is absolutely magnificent. Probably the best I think they've had. You can just tell the difference in terms of like the scope of this album versus, I would say, their other albums as well. It's bigger, it's bolder. I think it does everything that this band has done in the past better than they have done before. And despite me not liking the last one, I do feel like they learned from that album in terms of like employing that sound more effectively. For me, that really showed up on the longer songs on here. Those songs, those are the ones where I was kind of dreading because, all right, this is just going to be long-winded as hell, and I'm going to hate myself for the entire 8 minutes and 14 seconds that this song is. And it didn't. The songs were great. I was kind of just like lost in them, but I was also just really drawn in by the fact that the songwriting just really took a big jump on here. Hell, I was so serious about talking about this album that I totally forgot to mention that the cover model is Jenna Hayes. And if you know who that is, your Google search history is similar to mine. Yeah, if you're a big fan of, this sound overall, I would say Harakiri for the Sky, Ghost Bath, and stuff like that. But honestly, I think there's more to it this time. I don't know, like those are kind of like the base 2 bands I can think of, but you know what, this kind of won me over, and I wouldn't necessarily call myself a huge fan of this band. So if you were kind of like teetering on the edge as to whether or not you were a fan of this band or not, check this one out. Maybe this is the tipping point. It might be the tipping point for me. I don't know. We'll see what the next one sounds like. But for right now, this is good. Check it out. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They're only 99 cents, and our lone membership perk is doing a members-only live stream, which we'll probably be doing towards the end of April. And again, it's generally, just fun chit-chat, but who knows, we might have a themed one in the future. But memberships are the main way to support the channel overall. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. That is linked down below. And if you would like to join this channel and maybe hear me say more positive things about Deafheaven in the future, it could happen. There's a join button down there. Smash it, punch it, spit on it. Maybe not that last one, that's kind of gross, but join up if you'd like. And of course, thank you guys so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that stuff. It means the world to us. Tons of reviews coming up. We also have some discussion stuff that we're trying to get rolling, as well as more collection updates. I'm going to get back to doing more States of Metal stuff. Yeah, just tons of stuff, because that's what we do here overall. So one more big thank you, because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.